No one ever asked what happened to Sarah's face. Her co-workers looked away. Customers pretended not to notice the bruise she hid beneath cheap foundation and a tired smile. But that early morning, while cleaning the counter of the nearly empty diner, a different man appeared. The impeccable suit contrasted with his heavy gaze, and when he observed her for a few seconds in silence, she felt her heart race. "What happened to you?" he asked with a firm voice, but strangely calm. Sarah, terrified, murmured, I fell." Then the silence broke again, now with a cutting tone impossible to forget. "Don't lie to me." Those 3 words made the floor seem to tremble. It was as if he had seen the truth that everyone ignored and, without knowing it, was about to change her life forever. Sarah worked the graveyard shifts, when the city seemed to sleep and the sound of the street mixed with the buzzing of fluorescent lights. The diner where she served coffee and cold pies was a refuge for those fleeing from sleep or loneliness. And, ironically, it was also the place where she tried to hide from her own fear. Behind the counter, with the yellowed apron and hair hastily pulled back, Sarah smiled at strangers while her entire body ached. Under the long sleeves, the bruises told stories she never dared narrate aloud. She told herself she would endure just a little longer, just until she saved enough to disappear from David's life. Every day she put away a few bills hidden inside a cookie tin in the back cabinet, like someone guarding a secret too fragile to be seen. She dreamed of the day when that money would be the key to freedom, a one-way ticket to anywhere the pain wouldn't find her. But the problem with those who live surrounded by fear is that they learn to convince themselves that pain is normal. And it was this silent lie that Sarah repeated every morning, while cleaning the counter and trying to appear strong. The uniform was a disguise. The smile, armor. And the silence, the price she paid to survive another day. The people who saw Sarah there, between coffees and rushed orders, would never imagine the weight she carried. To customers, she was just a nice girl, with a sweet voice and discreet steps. But inside, there was a war that no one saw. Every time David raised his voice, she felt her heart shrink, as if fear fit into an increasingly smaller body. He was that type of man who knew how to smile in public and scream at home, who knew how to apologize with flowers and repeat the blows with the same hands. And Sarah, trapped in this cruel cycle, believed that love could cure violence, until she realized that true love never makes you bleed. Even so, she continued there, pretending everything was fine. And the most frightening thing was seeing how the entire world collaborated with this pretense. No one asked. No one really looked. It's curious how people prefer not to see what makes them feel powerless. How many emotional stories, how many real stories of women like Sarah repeat themselves every day among neighbors, co-workers, and strangers. Stories that scream in silence, hoping that someone, someday, will have the courage to see what others pretend not to notice. Sarah learned to measure every step. She avoided glances, economized words, and collected plans in secret. Fear was her alarm clock and hope her only faithful companion. When she served coffee, she observed couples laughing at tables and wondered when she had lost the right to be happy. She thought that perhaps she was born for this, to take care of others, to endure in silence, to not be noticed. But even when her body asked for rest, there was a small flame inside her that refused to go out. It was this flame that made her hide the money, one bill at a time, believing that one day she would leave without looking back. She dreamed of a simple place, a small town, maybe a boarding house by the sea, where no one knew her name, where she could paint, as she did before, and let the brush tell everything words couldn't, except that life sometimes chooses to intervene at the exact moment when you think nothing will change anymore. And it was precisely on one of those silent early mornings, amid the smell of coffee and exhaustion, that someone finally truly looked at her, that early morning star like any other. The sound of fine rain falling outside, steam rising from cups, and the clock marking the slow hours of those who are in no hurry to live. Sarah was thinking about the money she had hidden, and wondering if she could endure one more week. She was exhausted, but the fear of going home was always greater than the tiredness. That's when he entered, a tall man, in a dark suit and heavy gaze, crossed the diner door with the calm of someone who carries their own time in their pocket. Michael. She didn't know his name yet, but immediately felt there was something different about him. something between authority and danger. He sat at the counter, right in front of her, and for a few seconds the air seemed to stop, the kind of silence that precedes an important event. While Sarah prepared the coffee, she tried to turn her face away, but couldn't escape that firm, almost invasive gaze that seemed to see beyond the makeup and excuses. There was something about Michael that awakened fear and curiosity at the same time, as if fate had decided to test her that night. "Did you hurt yourself?" he asked, without taking his eyes off her. It wasn't the kind of polite question made out of courtesy. It was direct, almost authoritarian, and sounded like an order disguised as concern. Sarah choked on her own words, trying to laugh. "Oh!" "It was a silly stumble. I fell," she said quickly, lowering her gaze. Michael raised an eyebrow, slowly stirring the spoon in his coffee, and responded with a coldness that cut through the air. "Don't lie to me." In that instant, she felt her blood freeze. How could he know? Why did he seem so certain? No one had ever confronted her that way. People always pretended to believe, and she got used to lying by instinct. But Michael, with that firm voice and unshakable gaze, completely disarmed her. The silence between them became dense, almost palpable, as if the entire diner had stopped to listen. She tried to change the subject, but the man simply left a bill on the counter and a black card with gold letters. "Call when you decide to stop lying to yourself," he said, getting up slowly, and he left, leaving behind the strong smell of coffee and a mystery that burned more than the bruise on her face. Sarah stood still, looking at the card on the counter, not knowing whether to be scared or feel seen for the first time. His name, printed in elegant font, seemed to pulse under the yellowed light of the diner. Michael. Just that. No last name, no regular phone number, just a discreet number and a sense of veiled danger. She tried to laugh at the situation, telling herself he was just a man who was too curious. But something inside her knew it wasn't that. It was as if that encounter had been written somewhere invisible long before that night. And, without realizing it, Sarah took the card home, hiding it between the pages of an old book. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of curiosity. Little did she know that small piece of paper would be the turning point of her life. Because sometimes fate chooses unlikely messengers to pull us from rock bottom. And that night, the man many feared had just seen the pain she hid from the whole world. For a few minutes after Michael left, Sarah remained standing behind the counter, as if time had stopped along with him. The cup of coffee was cooling. The clock kept marking the hours. But she didn't move. She could still hear his voice echoing inside her head. Firm, direct, impossible to ignore. "Don't lie to me." It was different from all the times someone disguised "Are you okay?" out of pure formality. Those words had weight. It was as if they had pierced through all the layers of silence she had built around herself. And, as strange as it was, it hurt and at the same time relieved, because finally someone had seen what she was trying to hide. While cleaning the counter with trembling hands, she thought about how many people spend their entire lives hiding their pain behind ready-made answers. "I fell. It was an accident. Everything's fine." Expressions that sound innocent, but carry the weight of an entire world that contains suffering. And she, in that instant, realized she was also tired of lying, not just to others, but to herself. The black card, left on the counter, seemed to radiate a strange energy. Sarah picked it up like someone holding something dangerous. The paper was thick, with fine texture, and the name Michael came a number she had never seen before. It wasn't a regular phone number. It seemed reserved, almost secret. For a moment, she thought about tearing it up and throwing it away. But she couldn't. She felt as if that small object had a power that went beyond what she could understand. There was something about that man that put her on alert. It wasn't fear, but something close to curiosity and the sensation of being protected without understanding why. As she put the card inside her wallet, she felt her heart beat fast, as if a new phase was about to begin, even though she didn't know it yet. It's curious how, in life, sometimes the universe sends signs disguised as coincidence. And, although Sarah didn't believe much in fate, part of her knew that encounter hadn't been by chance. Something was about to change, and she felt it in the air, in her body, in the silence that remained after he left, that night. when her shift ended and she walked through the deserted streets. The cold wind hit her bruised face, and Sarah thought about everything that had happened. She tried to convince herself that Michael was just a curious customer, maybe even dangerous, and that it would be best to forget the episode. But she couldn't. Her mind kept going back to that phrase, that look, that card. It was as if a mirror had been placed in front of her for the first time, showing the truth she had avoided for so long. And, without realizing it, she began to think about what it would mean to stop lying to herself. Maybe it was the same as stopping pretending that David's love could still be fixed. Maybe it was the same as admitting she deserved something better. Maybe it was finally the first step toward freedom. Except that, while reflecting, she didn't imagine that fate was already preparing the next blow, a blow that would come for where she least expected, and that would put her life at risk before she could even decide what to do with that card. Sarah arrived home late, as usual. The streets were wet, reflecting the yellowed lights of the lampposts, and the cold wind seemed to announce that something bad was approaching. The apartment, small and stuffy, smelled of cigarettes and cheap cologne. His smell. David was awake, sitting on the couch, with dark and fixed gaze, like a predator lying in wait. "You're late, aren't you?" he asked, with that tone loaded with irony and contained rage. Sarah felt her stomach turn. She tried to explain, to say that it was busy at the diner, but before she could even take off her jacket, he had already ripped the purse from her hands. When the card fell to the floor, she knew she was doomed. David picked it up, looked at it carefully, and a twisted smile appeared on his face. "Michael?" he repeated, with venom dripping in every syllable. "Who's this guy, huh? Your new lover? Is that why you've been dressing up more, right?" His voice kept rising, his face contorting with fury. Sarah tried to explain, tried to say the man was just a customer, but the slap came before the words. The dry sound of the aggression echoed through the walls like a sentence. She stumbled, trying to balance herself, but he grabbed her by the arm and pushed her outside, as if he wanted the world to see the spectacle of his rage. "You think you can fool me? That you can replace me with just anyone?" he screamed, pushing her against the wet asphalt. Tears mixed with rain, and Sarah could barely distinguish what was water and what was blood. Neighbors heard, but no one came out. Windows closed, curtains moved discreetly. This is how cowardice disguises itself as prudence. With each blow, she felt her soul shatter a little more, but something was also being born inside her, a force she couldn't name. Fear was beginning to give way to an ancient anger, a feeling that she wouldn't endure living that way anymore. It was as if, between each punch, a part of her whispered in silence, "Enough." How many emotional stories haven't been born exactly like this? From pain that, although brutal, ends up awakening courage. And, without realizing it, on that cold and dirty ground, Sarah was about to cross the line between the woman who gets beaten and the woman who finally decides to fight. David raised his hand once more, ready for the next blow, but something interrupted the movement. A sound of an engine approaching, bright headlights cutting through the darkness of the deserted street. A black car stopped abruptly beside them, and for an instant, time seemed to drag. The car door opened, and a deep, authoritative voice echoed like thunder. "Let her go." David turned, confused, but before he could react, he saw the cold gleam of a gaze that admitted no resistance. Michael got out of the car with a terrifying calm, the kind of calm that only those who master danger are capable of having. "Sarah, get in," he ordered, and, for the first time in a long time, she obeyed without thinking. The door closed behind her, muffling the sound of the rain, the accelerated breathing, the confusion. Outside, the world kept spinning, but inside, something new was beginning. And, even without fully understanding what was happening, Sarah knew nothing would be the same again. The rain gave no respite, and each drop seemed to accompany the hurried sound of Sarah's heart. The asphalt reflected distorted lights, and the cold cut through the air like invisible blades. David, blind with jealousy, was about to raise his hand again, his face deformed by rage, when the deep roar of the engine announced what she would never imagine: fate's intervention. The black car emerged at the corner, gliding down the street like a living shadow. The tires splashed water, and the headlight blinded both of their vision. The door opened slowly, and the man in the dark suit emerged from the shadows. The same fixed gaze, the same dominant presence. Michael walked with firm steps, the heavy coat swaying under the rain, and there was something in his posture that commanded respect without needing words. "Let her go," he said in a low tone, but his voice carried a power that made David hesitate for an instant. Sarah, motionless, observed the silent confrontation between two worlds, that of cowardly violence and that of calculated force. And in that instant, she realized that fear was changing owners. David tried to react, mumbling something about not getting involved in other people's business. But Michael just stared at him. One look was enough to paralyze any attempt at resistance. The difference between the two was glaring. One, dominated by hatred and weakness. The other, guided by a cold and dangerous authority. Michael took a step forward and said calmly, "She's coming with me." Sarah, trembling, looked at both of them, not knowing if she was obeying fear or intuition. And when he repeated the command, "Get in the car," she felt a strange sense of security. Her hands trembled as she approached the door, her fingers slipping from the rain. When she got in, the cold leather of the seat seemed to welcome her, as if silently saying, "It's over." Outside, David was still shouting, but his voice already sounded distant, muffled by the sound of the engine. Michael got in shortly after, and within seconds the car sped off, leaving behind not only a man lost in his own fury, but also a part of Sarah's life that she would never want to revisit again. Inside the car, the silence was heavy, but not threatening. The fog window reflected fragments of the city passing by too fast, as if the past was being left behind on purpose. Sarah didn't know what to say, or if she should say anything. Michael drove without looking at her, his jaw locked, his expression indecipherable. His hands gripped the steering wheel firmly, but there was something contained in that gaze, a silent anger, perhaps directed at himself or at the world that allowed things like this to happen. She observed his profile through the cracks of light from the lamppost and, for the first time, felt fear and relief coexisting. She wanted to thank him, but her voice wouldn't come out. "You shouldn't go back there," he said, without taking his eyes off the road. It was more a statement than advice. And in that instant, Sarah understood that her life had changed, even though she still didn't know the size of the storm that would come after. Because the man who saved her wasn't just a stranger. He was someone with dark secrets, as deep as hers. And every mile that moved away from David was taking her, unknowingly, straight to the heart of a dangerous world, where nothing would be simple, but everything would finally make sense. The road seemed endless, a line of shadows and light stretching under the blanket of early morning. The windshield wiper scratched the glass rhythmically, as if accompanying the rhythm of thoughts Michael was trying to suppress. Sarah, huddled in the corner of the seat, observed a reflection of lights passing over her face, a face marked by pain, but also by silent resistance. She held the coat he had given her, the fabric still with the warmth of his body, and every detail of that surreal situation made her heart beat hard. Michael broke the silence without looking at her. "Do you have anyone? Anywhere to go?" The question sounded more like contained concern than curiosity. Sarah hesitated. She didn't know if she could trust, but she also knew she had no choice. "No," she answered quietly. And it was in that instant, when he just nodded without insisting, that she realized something different about him. Michael didn't want to know details, didn't want to control. He just wanted to get her out of there. The type of man who doesn't ask questions because he already understands the pain without needing to hear the story. They drove for more than an hour until the car parked in front of a house set back from the road, simple on the outside, but solid like a refuge. The windows were closed, and the sound of rain hitting the roof seemed calmer there. Michael opened the door for her to get out, and, for the first time, Sarah saw him under the light. His face, firm and serene, had subtle marks, small scars, almost imperceptible, that told stories of battles she couldn't even imagine. He led her inside, lit a fireplace, and offered a towel. No words beyond what was necessary. Sarah sat near the fire, trying to warm her hands and mainly her heart. Michael stepped away, opened a bottle of wine, and filled 2 glasses. "Drink. It'll help you sleep." She hesitated, but accepted. The dark liquid went down warm, and the tension began to dissolve gradually. His gaze followed her intensely, but without invasion. There was a dangerous mix of protection and curiosity there, as if Michael was fighting an internal battle not to get too close. When the clock struck 3 in the morning, Sarah had already fallen asleep on the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket. Michael stood for a while, just watching. There was something about that fragile and confused face that moved him in a way he didn't want to admit. It wasn't just compassion. It was something deeper, something he recognized, as if he saw in Sarah the same abyss he carried inside himself. The fireplace fire projected shadows on her face, and for a moment he allowed himself a dangerous thought. She shouldn't be here. But at the same time, he knew he couldn't leave her alone. His past was a labyrinth of wrong choices. Secrets no one should discover, and people would already pay dearly for getting too close. He turned off the lights, leaned against the wall, and closed his eyes for a moment, aware that, by taking Sarah in, he had also opened the door to something that could completely change the course of his life. And perhaps, deep down, that was exactly what he feared, or desired. The sun appeared timid after days of rain, and for the first time Sarah could see the world outside that house. The air smelled of wet earth and freedom, but also of uncertainty. Michael watched her through the window while she walked barefoot in the garden, her hair still damp, trying to get used to the feeling of being safe. There was something deeply melancholic about that image, a woman who seemed to be relearning to breathe. He looked away, trying to convince himself he was doing the right thing, that it was enough to leave her there for a while, until she recovered. But something in him insisted on staying close. When she came back inside, the simple clothes she wore, borrowed from him, made it clear how temporary this refuge was. "Can I help with anything?" she asked, trying to break the silence. Michael answered without raising his eyes. "You don't need to. I already made coffee." And yet, that small gesture, the smell of fresh coffee, bread cut in perfect slices, revealed that he cared for her without admitting it. The days followed with a tense calm. Michael left early, sometimes without saying where he was going, and returned late with a distant look and heavy countenance. Sarah pretended not to notice, but every detail fed her curiosity. He received calls he answered outside, spoke little, and slept even less. At night, she heard him pacing back and forth in the living room, as if fighting against something invisible. There were moments when their gazes crossed and time seemed to stop, not because of romance, but because of recognition. They were two survivors trying to understand that they could trust each other. One afternoon, when he arrived with his arm injured, Sarah instinctively approached to help him. He pulled back, and her gaze dropped to the wound. It wasn't a simple scratch. "Did it happen at work?" she asked, and he took too long to answer. Something like that. It was in that instant that she realized Michael was hiding something dangerous, something that kept him in constant alert, and yet, instead of fear, she felt empathy, because, somehow, they both carried ghosts that haunted them in silence. On a cold night, while the fireplace illuminated the interior of the house, Michael sat on the floor near the fire, and Sarah watched him in silence. He seemed tired, as if each breath weighed more than the previous one. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. He took a while to answer, staring at the flames as if searching for an answer in them. "Because I saw in your eyes what I've already seen in mine." The words hung in the air, dense, loaded with truth. Sarah didn't insist. She understood. That man wasn't a hero, and maybe didn't even want to be. But somehow, he had chosen to save her, because he also needed to save himself. The silence returned to take over. But this time it was a different silence, no longer one of distrust, but of connection. That night, both slept for the first time in peace. They didn't know yet, however, that Michael's past was about to knock on the door, and that the refuge that seemed safe would transform into the epicenter of a storm that neither of them could avoid. Time passed almost imperceptibly inside that refuge. Sarah began to notice subtle details that previously went unnoticed. The way Michael arranged objects with precision, how each gesture seemed calculated to maintain a certain balance in the silent chaos of his life. She also realized that her own breathing changed when he was around, as if the simple fact of existing there guaranteed protection. It was a strange feeling, fear and security mixed in proportions she never believed were possible. And yet it was real. Michael didn't need to speak. His presence spoke for him. He made coffee every morning, checked if anything was out of place, made sure she was fed, rested, protected. But there were moments when his gaze softened and, for a few seconds, the world became smaller, less cruel. Sarah felt for the first time in years as if she could breathe without waiting for the next blow, without calculating each step like a prisoner. She began to allow herself small joys, like laughing while preparing a meal, walking to the garden, or simply watching the fire in the fireplace. Each simple gesture was, for her, a silent victory. Michael, for his part, began to realize that protecting Sarah wasn't just an act of strength, but of vulnerability. He found himself thinking about her during the day, imagining if she was safe, if she could sleep well, if she could smile. It was a new feeling and, in a way, dangerous for someone accustomed to trusting only himself. He felt the need to keep her away from the world, but at the same time realized he couldn't isolate her forever. Each conversation, each gesture of care transformed into a subtle dance between respect and approach. And Sarah, perceiving his hesitation, began to open up little by little, sharing memories, small childhood stories, and forgotten dreams, as if the silence that once separated them was transforming into a bridge. She felt that, finally, she could trust someone without needing to defend herself at every word or look. For the first time, the feeling of belonging and security mixed with the fear of what was still to come, making each moment together intense, almost palpable. The bond growing between them was complex, made of nuances and almost invisible gestures. Michael wasn't perfect. His history was marked by secrets, wrong choices, and scars that still hurt. But his presence was firm, constant, and surprisingly comforting. Sarah, for her part, learned to feel strength without fear, to see care without judging, and to allow someone to get close without the threat of pain. They talked about trivial things like food or music, but each word carried a weight of intimacy and trust that neither had felt before. It was a type of connection that forms slowly, but leaves deep marks, capable of transforming lives. And, in the shared silence of the room lit only by the fire, Sarah realized she was learning something rare. That security and love can coexist, that trust can heal wounds, and that, even after so much pain, there is still room for real and emotional stories of new beginnings. But, although peace seemed close, a shadow from Michael's past still hovered, ready to test how far that protection and that bond could really go. David, after the last confrontation, finally realized that the world had changed for Sarah. It wasn't just Michael's strength that intimidated him, but the feeling that she no longer belonged to him. Michael didn't need to make explicit threats, nor show unnecessary violence. The calculated silence, the firm presence, and the certainty in the eyes of someone who knows the power they possess were enough. He made it clear that any attempt to regain control would be useless, that Sarah was no longer an object of his jealousy and fear, but someone with the right to freedom. And so, David was removed from her life definitively, a silent and unequivocal warning that violence would no longer have a place there. Sarah watched from afar, her heart still beating fast, but with a sense of deep relief. For the first time, no one could hurt her without consequences. It was a kind of security she never imagined existed, the kind that creates roots in the soul and allows dreams, once suffocated, to begin to flourish again. With David finally out of the picture, Michael decided it was time to help Sarah rebuild what pain had erased. He knew the value of art, not just as expression, but as escape, therapy, and rebirth. He bought materials, paints, brushes, and mainly space. A small studio on the floor of the penthouse, full of natural light, wide windows, and walls waiting to be filled with colors and emotions. Sarah entered the place for the first time and felt her heart race. It was as if each brushstroke could finally tear away the ghosts of the past. Michael watched in silence, smiling in a contained way, satisfied to see that she was beginning to allow herself to be whole again. And, in that comfortable silence, a connection was reinforced. Him protecting her, her trusting, both learning that the past doesn't need to determine the future. Each painted picture was a step toward freedom, each color a reminder that life could be rebuilt, even after so much pain. The following weeks were a period of rebirth. Sarah spent hours in the studio, losing herself in colors, shapes, and textures, while Michael took care of practical details, making sure nothing disturbed her process. As the paintings multiplied, So did the trust between them, now strengthened by the certainty that together they could face the outside world without fear. Sarah began to feel proud of herself again, to realize that her talent and her dreams hadn't been destroyed, just postponed. And at the same time, Michael discovered that protecting someone could be more gratifying than controlling, that true human connection surpasses power and violence. Both their paths intertwined in silence, wounds healed by care, attention, understanding. They learned that security isn't just physical, but emotional, and that, when offered genuinely, it transforms lives. But even with life reorganizing itself, an even greater future awaited them, about to reveal itself in a gesture that would symbolize freedom and belonging. 6 months had passed since that night when Michael saved her, and their lives had changed in ways neither of them could have foreseen. Sarah now walked to the studio every day, surrounded by the colors that filled her walls, by the works that told stories of pain, hope, and rebirth. Michael watched her with a mixture of pride and tenderness, feeling that each day she became stronger, more complete. Their intimacy wasn't made just of words or romantic gestures. It was built in silence, in respect, in small details that confirmed that both had found security in each other. They spent mornings talking about trivial things, afternoons among brushes and paints, and evenings contemplating the ocean from the penthouse balcony, feeling the wind as if it carried the past away. Sarah, for the first time in years, felt she had a home, not just a physical place, but a safe emotional space, where she could be free without fear. Each smile, each exchanged look, was a silent reminder of how much they had overcome together, and how much there was still to discover. On a golden afternoon, Michael called her outside the penthouse, holding a small velvet box in his hands. Sarah felt her heart race, her stomach turn, and a mixture of curiosity and emotion grow inside her. He opened the box, revealing a golden key that reflected the setting sun's light. "This is for you," Michael said with a firm voice, but loaded with feeling. "A house by the ocean. A place that's yours, ours, where you can be whoever you want. Where there's no fear, no past chasing you." Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes, emotion overwhelming her completely. It wasn't just a key. It was a concrete representation of freedom, of belonging, of love that needed no justification. She touched his hand, squeezed the key, and felt that every step they had taken until then, the pain, the fear, the escape, the courage, had been worth it. Life, finally, seemed to align with the dreams she thought were lost. The day they entered the house by the ocean was like crossing a door to a new dimension. The gentle wind carried the smell of the ocean. The sound of waves filled the silence comfortingly, and the afternoon light illuminated every corner as if blessing the new beginning. Sarah walked through the rooms, feeling the texture of the wood, the space that could be filled with her colors, her ideas, her own identity. Michael remained by her side, watching with contained smile, satisfied to see peace finally settle on her face. They didn't need words to understand that this place symbolized more than a house. It was a materialization of their freedom, security, and belonging. There, each breath was less heavy, each heartbeat lighter, and each exchange look carried the silent promise that, despite everything they suffered, they found something greater. Not just love, but the certainty that together they could start over, without fear, without rush, with courage to live each emotional story that life still had in store for them. What would you do if you had the chance to completely change your life, face your fear, and recover the freedom that seemed lost? Sarah shows us that, even after pain, violence, and manipulation, it's possible to find courage, security, and true love, but only if you're willing to see the truth, not hide behind lies, and act for yourself. Think about your own choices. Have you allowed fear to dictate your steps, or are you ready to take the reins of your destiny? Real stories like hers teach us that every decision counts, that every gesture of courage is a step toward transformation. So reflect, be inspired, and ask yourself, what am I willing to change today to live the life I truly deserve? And if you want to keep learning about courage, overcoming, and new beginnings, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because your next emotional story might just be beginning.